Leaving the arena. One horsewoman's exit from the culture of mastery and the wisdom that followed. Arena, a place or scene of activity, debate, or conflict. I'm not too proud to admit that I made a fake profile on a dating site the day after my ex-husband left me in Turkey. Maybe I'm a little proud. It told me all I needed to know. As I posed as a blonde with perfect proportions, he easily chatted about all he disliked about his wife. "She doesn't ride anymore," he wrote. "I think she's afraid of horses." The truth, as usual, didn't fit into a single sentence. Let's get started. Better medicine. I take a daily scroll through the BBC and try to dive beneath the headlines to discover the pieces of humanity captured from around the world beyond the noise that keeps us terrified and numbed into inaction. This is where I discovered a game-changing snakebite antivenom being developed from the blood of an American man. He has spent 18 years injecting himself with venom and purposefully subjecting himself to bites to build up his natural defenses. Initially, he did this for protection as a snake handler, but the secrets contained in his antibodies inspired a mission to work with researchers to develop a better universal antivenom to protect hundreds of thousands of people who are annually killed and maimed by snake bites around the world. When not snake handling, he works as a mechanic. The information in his blood is now being used to produce universal antivenom, a job that has previously been given to horses. Most antivenoms on the market today are produced by injecting horses with venom from snakes, spiders, and scorpions, and then harvesting their blood plasma, rich in antibodies, to produce a serum ready for human bite victims. Once again, I've learned something new about horses. This got me thinking about how we inadvertently inoculate ourselves to poisons. A metaphor exploded in my brain, which is like a song getting stuck, but it's wispy and more vague. Metaphors dissolve when you try to nail them down, only to reappear in a different place. I watch horses help people heal and grow into their skins every day. They do this by reversing the layers of protection we've built up, slowly, over time, to 1,000 lifelong pains. We inoculate ourselves to the poison of discomfort, thinking we need to just take it, ignore it, get over it, whatever it is. By the time we've grown up and come face to face with a horse in a moment of truth, all those hidden slights work their way to the surface, deep splinters, and we can't ignore the throbbing anymore. This reverse inoculation via horse asks us to remember we have a nervous system thrumming with information. The horse brings us back into our mostly ignored bodies, and we have the opportunity to sort through what we need to still haul along with us and what is ready to be discarded. For all the contributions of the horse to the science of healing our physical bodies, they have for eons been offering us a balm for our emotions, for our spirit. It's hard to quantify that kind of healing, but the effects with time cross over to the physical. Feeling is believing. But the truth is, no horse can do the work for us. They can show us where it hurts and peel back the layers and hold up a mirror. But if we keep choosing the poison, the antidote has nowhere to go. At some point, we have to stop blaming the world for what we keep repeating. And we have to stop asking horses to carry what we're unwilling to put down. Our healing only begins when we take responsibility for what we've swallowed, what we've silenced, and what we're ready to unlearn. The body speaks when we refuse to listen. Mine did, beneath the weight of a horse I had failed to protect, in an arena where I'd traded kinship for obedience far too long. The fall. I kept a flask of whiskey tucked into my duffel bag of tricks I hauled from barn to barn. Back then, I lived on the road with my car as a rolling tack room, and my life stitched together through rides and arenas across the region. The day the horse flipped over on top of me, I was lying in thick, unforgiving sand, trying to decide if I could move my leg. Pain bloomed and pulsed through my body, and it was sharp enough to drain my willpower. I asked someone to grab the bag from my car because I needed something to dull the edge before I did what I knew I had to do next. I had to get back on. But to do that, I had to manufacture some courage. I knew that if I did not get back on as soon as I could stand, dragging my leg behind me, I'd probably never get back on this horse at all. Last week, I told you about my first teaching gig at a big barn carved into the side of a mountain. There were too many instructors, too many programs vying for top place, and competition between staff was cultivated and encouraged. I worked out of several other small barns and had a great roster of students and horses in training, but they didn't do much to curb the stress I carry with me on the road between farms. The barn manager at the big barn hired me to ride her horse several days a week. The goal was to put miles on the mare and start her over jumps. I rode her over the course of months and felt like we were reaching an understanding. What I didn't know until it was too late was that another trainer was riding the horse on my off days. And this goes back to Tommy and the draw reins and how he told me to not use them. There was a goal for me to get the little mare's head down as she was ridden. The owner wanted to see her travel with her nose low and her neck flexed. And I didn't know yet how to spend years with a horse, offering the freedom to build strength slowly, so there wasn't a need to raise their head out of tension stemming from the rider in the first place. So I caved. I unbuckled the regular reins and looped the draw reins through the metal O-rings of her bridle, sliding them into place. It was a small decision made under pressure, against my gut, against Tommy's voice in my head, but I needed to give results. I needed to keep the job. The mare was unfazed by the contraption as I warmed her up. I'd used it on her before, but coming down the long side of the huge arena fenced in tall metal livestock panels, the mare paused and lost momentum. She planted her feet and she gave a little hop. Thinking she was going to rear, I tapped her neck between her ears, and her feet left the ground completely. Unable to balance herself through the sudden crank of the draw reins, the motion of rearing caused her to lose her footing. Up with nowhere to go, she heaved herself to save herself, and then she flipped over backward. I, by the grace of every guardian spirit, slid off her rump mid-fall. I landed in the V formed by her hind legs, and the fence, as the full force of her back landed on top of the metal rails above me, right where I had been sitting. I heard the structure that held my saddle together snap in two. Everything felt like it was happening in slow motion, and I remember consciously realizing the horse had two options as she twisted to stand. She could land completely on top of me, or she would have to step on my body with her foot to regain balance. I sat beneath her with my legs stretched out in front of me. I watched the arc of her movement shift in an attempt to save me from the full blow. The force of her right hind foot came down on my calf, and she used this point as a springboard to move away from me. All in all, she did everything in her power to inflict the least possible damage on the little human who had gotten her into this horrible fix. She could have easily killed me or herself that day. I smelled death in the metal of our sweat. She did right by me, even though I had done awfully by her. The owner of the horse and the other riders in the ring ran to check on me. I fumbled in my bag for the flask of whiskey, and I took a big, long swallow. I used the arms of the people around me to leverage myself up from the sand. I gathered the mare's torture reins, and I swung back on top of her. I was doing what I had always been told to do. I got back on. My leg was remarkably unbroken, but the hematoma stretched from my knee to my ankle. My leg was black, but it didn't stop me. I rode side saddle for the next 6 months. It wasn't courage that lifted me back into the saddle. It was something older, like a reflex or a ritual, a muscle memory passed down from all my teachers. But after that day, something inside of me started to warp. A shift moved like a shadow under my skin, gray and mottled like my leg. I didn't have the foresight to call it clarity. I just knew that I was riding with something broken, and it wasn't just my leg or my pride or my ego. I think it was my heart. The offside. For years, I told myself the story that the accident happened because someone else had been riding the mare, that another trainer had unstitched our rhythm, and that I was working uphill against sabotage. Blaming the world is exhausting, and I'm too tired now to keep chasing culprits. I'd like to blame the other trainer for the accident, but the signs of an upcoming sensory avalanche were there all along. I was just too busy and inexperienced to read them. As I moved from barn to barn, saddle to saddle, I wasn't finding time in the transits to do the long, slow work of watching and noticing and feeling. There was no stillness, only results. Riding side saddle because my body gave me no other choice during that time, I first wondered why it was women relegated to the side saddle when men had more moving parts to protect down there. But as I kept on, I realized that riding side saddle is a practice in waiting. In a fixed position from the waist down, you have no choice but to wait. For the jump to come to you, for the off girth to be tightened by someone on the ground, for the horse to respond. The horses used for side saddle are chosen for their steadiness. I wasn't ready to stop riding, but I needed something to slow me down. Riding aside did what I couldn't do for myself. It held me still. And in that stillness, I started to see that I had been riding horses the way I treated myself, by pushing them past their limits until their bodies, like mine, shut me down. There had to be a better, less painful way to live with horses. Stable Roots is where I share stories about horses, resilience, and the life I've built from both. I write weekly about connection, healing, and the messy, beautiful business of showing up. You can subscribe for free and follow along. A paid subscription goes even further by directly supporting the farm, the horses, and the work we do here every day. However you choose to be a part of this community, I'm just grateful that you're here. The arena. Max and I were together teaching, managing farms, hosting clinics, and giving presentations for 5 years before I rolled all our operations into one spot. I named it Bramblewood Stables, and our first home base, before we moved to the farm we've been operating out of for the past 2 decades, was the farm I had grown up in. The barn of my childhood was an old beast with a big arena enclosed in a metal racetrack fence and acres of turnout fields. With everything in one spot, The 3+ hours I'd spend on the road each day were condensed into time I could use to hang out with the rhythms of my herd. 6 horses on loan from a summer camp joined Max and me to teach people how to ride. Blackjack, a pony with the soul of a beautiful dragon, followed me from the big barn on the side of the mountain. I purchased 3 others and sank into the actions of feeding, cleaning, fixing, teaching, learning, noticing. I knew the land and I remembered its stories. I knew what gullies held the memories of pain. I knew which corners were haunted. I bought hay from one cousin. Another mowed the fields. Another taught me the names of plants. I'd come home to myself, and Max was beside me. The constant rage to know and to do and to be was still held in the sweat of my pores. But with a place to call my own, I no longer felt like a ghost on the edge of other people's lives. I had the freedom to stop pushing my body into places that felt unwelcoming. I had time to notice, maybe for the first time in my life. I still traveled to the master once a week to ride his horses in lessons. I saw Tommy Smith sporadically, if at all, but he was always a lifeline at the other end of the phone. My time with the master was sacrosanct. I never canceled or scheduled anything else from morning to late afternoon on Wednesdays. I made the long drive up the mountain, rode, discussed, and wrote in my notebook at a table by myself in a little bar in the center of Tryon, North Carolina, the birthplace of horse sports in America. I used the notes to teach the students at my home farm during the week. The last day I rode with the master, the last day I rode as an act of performance, was absolutely normal in every way. New green bloomed in the trees. The drive was soothing. My tall boots were worn and burnished like beautiful gloves against my calves. My hair was twisted up in a net, perfectly contained beneath my helmet. I was poised and collected and totally looked the part of a young, accomplished, connected professional making her way into the equestrian elite. The master's groom prepared my ride for the day, a young horse who had just arrived from Europe, fresh out of quarantine and delivered to the farm a few days before. Something in my gut said no. The horse told me no. But I'd built a whole life by overriding my instincts. I saw anxiety as a weakness. There wasn't time for it. We had work to do. Instead of mounting at the barn, I walked beside the horse down the long hill to the arena. We passed 3 sets of mounting stairs, 3 chances to make a choice. I led the horse past them and into the center of the arena where another mounting block waited. I tightened the girth. All I could think was, I don't know this horse. He doesn't know me. How could we work together when neither of us understood the rules of the game or what language the rules were written in? We were both expected to follow orders. I stood on the top step of the mounting block for a moment. My hands and feet were numb, my chest constricted in defense. My heart was in my throat, or maybe on my sleeve. How long had it been since I realized I had a heart? Somewhere beneath where my palms rested on the horse's wither and the back of the saddle, the giant organ of the horse's heart pumped a song of trepidation and loneliness. He'd just arrived. A cargo hold across the ocean, the scent of fear in the quarantine facility, a longer trailer ride down the East Coast, a creature built for familiarity, forced to function like a machine in the unknown. I placed my leg across the saddle and I sat down, because that's what we do when we say we love horses. We ride. The young horse pivoted onto his hind legs, arced his giant body up, and reared. We hadn't taken a step forward. I'm supposed to ride through this, I thought. And then a single word rose up through the immediacy of my convictions. Why? That tiny word changed the course of my life. Why? I slid off the horse's back and landed solidly on my own 2 feet. I lifted the reins over his head. The master had entered the ring while I was mounting. I walked the horse over to him and handed over the reins. I'm taking the Appaloosa for a hack in the woods, I said, leaving the young horse with him. I'm finished. The Appaloosa was an enormous horse that babysat riders in the hunt field. He carried uncertainty for a living. He carried mine as we rode quietly down the trails and the old, lush forest around the farm. The horse was unhurried and unbothered. His legs moved steadily as the last of my adrenaline faded and feeling returned to my limbs. The rich, earthy smell of his sweat mixed with the damp loam of the woods. The movement of his legs softened the ache in my joints and dampened the acid in my throat. I allowed my questions to settle. A long time later, we emerged from the trail by the arena. The gates were shut, and the master stood in the center, battling the last energy remaining in the young horse I had returned to him. The master was angry, and the horse had been free-lunged past fear into exhaustion. I ached for the horse, and I knew, finally, that this place had never been my home. I couldn't blame the master for punishing the horse. He was doing what he knew to do, what all the horsemen before him had been told to do. Centuries on the battlefield, taking orders. I didn't want to be at war anymore. I knew then that any riding I did in the future had to come from the part of my mind that wasn't indoctrinated with precision. It would happen without the need to look good, without the goal of doing everything right, without my ego. It had to come instead from my id, my subconscious, the knowing embedded in my primordial core. It had to come from a place of action, not reaction. And that is why I rarely ride anymore, even though I'll always be a riding instructor. I'll spend the rest of my life looking for a better way. If I were a horse. I watch Carol prepare her horse for riding, how she spends upward of an hour brushing, tending, and easing tension. By the time she places a saddle on the horse's back, the horse is dozing, quiet, and ready to connect. She spends an equal amount of time offering restoration to the horse after a conscious, deliberate ride. I've had many rides where the horse and I worked together joyfully, Carol says. She's responding to a piece I published last week. Riding was never the goal. Carol always gives my writing her full attention. I love our conversations and how we circle the same questions from different angles, always returning to the horses. I didn't write that piece for you, I say. I wrote it as the owner of a public riding stable. I don't have a choice but to put various people on top of my horses all day. If everyone rode with the same consideration as you, riding would never be a chore for the horses. Do you think riding is wrong? She asks. I don't, I say. But right now, I'm consumed with the unmounted work because it prepares riders to ride with more presence and gives horses the space to say yes. It protects them. It teaches us. It sustains the school. It gives purpose to the horses in rehab. I'm obsessed with finding new ways for people to love horses without always asking the horse to pay for it. That makes sense. Thank you, Carol says. If I were a horse, I would be glad to have you on my back, I say. We don't talk much more after this. We don't have to. I watch Carol move her hand down the horse's legs, feeling for heat, moving the energy. The work that we're doing now is slow and deliberate, and it speaks for itself. It doesn't always look like much, and it's not glamorous or showy, but it leaves the horses intact. And that's what I want to keep building here. A place where we don't rush the horse, where we don't rush ourselves. And when we ride with reverence. Field notes. Taking a long break from active writing gave me the chance to stop blaming everyone else for the things I'm not proud of. I accept the fault with hard-earned grace and a heap of self-kindness. I didn't realize I'd stopped blaming the world until I started writing this piece. I also want to give a giant shout out to Tamar Reno. Her conversations helped me turn the lens back onto myself, to stop inoculating myself with the poison of shame. If you haven't already read it, check out her piece, The Opposite of the Kentucky Derby, about what happens to thoroughbreds when they retire, along with a lot of other stuff the world needs to hear. I'm linking to that in my show notes. And if you're new here and missed the past few weeks' posts in honor of Max, the little red horse who made me, and my life spent running a public riding stable alongside him, check out the posts that will also be linked in the show notes. Don't skip the money, the cost of entry, and riding was never the goal. Some of us are still in the arena, but we've changed the footing. I'll be back next week with more stories. Love, Kim.